here to wrap up the weekend edition of the Korelin Economics Report. I'm Al Korelin. Appreciate you joining me. As you know, we have originated this entire program from the San Francisco Hard Asset Investment Conference. Got to tell you, you folks listening up in radio station KUIK in Portland, Oregon, we're just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road from you. Next year, you ought to come on down here. Okay. Got Peter Schiff with me right now. Peter is one of the most outspoken and interesting guys in our particular industry. Peter actually ran for Congress, if I'm not mistaken, from the state of Connecticut.
I did run for U.S. Senate there in
U.S.
2010.
Senate, yep,
yeah,
yep,
part
yep.
of Congress.
You are, yes, it is. I learned that in grade school, believe it or not. Peter, you run a firm called Euro Pacific Capital. Okay, you've been involved in the investment community for a long time. You've been very active politically for a long time. I want to get your take on what's going on right now in the U.S. politically and how you think that will ultimately affect the investment community.
Well, we're at a very dangerous point in our evolution. When we began, we were a republic. We had a strong constitution that limited the power, not only of the federal government, but of the people to use the ballot box to redistribute wealth. We had a lot of checks on democracy. The founding fathers viewed democracy very skeptically. They looked at it as a tyranny of the majority. They called it mobocracy. And so they tried to write a lot of safeguards into the Constitution, which worked very well for a long time. But about 100 years ago with the progressive movement, they started to dismantle a lot of these safeguards. And now they're pretty much non-existent. And we've seen the results where you have an enormous number of Americans living off of the taxpayers, and they're outvoting them. And you had an election that was really, an advanced auction on the sale of stolen goods. And Obama promised to, deliver a lot of free things to his supporters and tax other people to pay for it. And, we're running out of other people's money. I think we're disintegrating and are on the verge of an economic meltdown.
What I think is really interesting that you just brought up is something that I read in an interview yesterday with Mitt Romney, where Mitt said, basically, Mitt said, not basically, purely and simply, he said, it's pretty obvious the Democrats bought the election. How did they do that? Well, let's talk about the student loan situation. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Basically, they're maintaining power by spending your money and my money.
True, but unfortunately, Mitt didn't really present a good contrast. He signed on to a lot of those programs. What he should have done is tried to appeal to the voters who are paying all the bills. Instead of promising more student loans, like he did in the debates, he should have said we got to get rid of the Department of Education, get rid of student loans, because that's why college is so expensive. If we didn't have the government subsidizing it, college tuitions would plunge, and you wouldn't have to borrow all this money to go to college. And by the way, too many Americans are going to college. You don't need a college degree for most of the jobs that people do once they graduate. So it's a myth perpetuated by the educational establishment, and the politicians buy into it to get the votes and the money. But it's not helping the country, and it's hurting the most the students. In fact, I got an interesting YouTube video. I just put it up. If you YouTube,
I watch all your stuff. I watch all your stuff on YouTube.
Yeah,
we link
Peter
them on our
Schiff
site.
Students.
Yeah.
And I interviewed a bunch of college grads in New Orleans when I was at the New Orleans conference. And take a look at the jobs that college grads have in America today.
The video that you did that actually had me in stitches was the video that you shot at the Democratic Convention. That was priceless.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much summed it up. I went around the Democratic Convention asking the delegates if they would be in favor of a law banning corporate profits, and a very significant percentage said, yeah, I'd be in favor of that law. And these were the smart Democrats. These are the ones that were at the convention.
As Ronald Reagan said, it's not the Democrats are dumb. The fact of the matter is they just know so much that isn't true. And that's I think, a very, very good point. You brought up an interesting point about Romney that I'm going to tell you a funny story. 165,000 people listened to us on the internet alone. And I went on record about 2 weeks prior to the election, Peter, by saying that, I was going to vote for Mitt Romney simply because I really, really couldn't support what the administration, what their plan, in my opinion, was. And, I'll tell you, a week before the election, I retracted that statement. I said, I'm really sorry. I've got to get up every morning and look myself in the mirror. He's not the guy either. And I wrote in Ron Paul.
Yeah, well, I voted for Gary Johnson.
You're right,
yeah,
sure.
I didn't write in Ron Paul, though I would have voted Ron Paul if his name was on the ballot. But I wanted to help Gary. He got over 1 million votes, which was the most any Libertarian candidate had. But if I was in a swing state, if I was living in Florida, my mother lived in Florida, she voted for Romney, basically as the lesser of the two evils. I mean, I wasn't a big Romney fan, but I knew that I could vote my conscience in Connecticut. In fact, as soon as the polls closed at 8 o'clock, at 8:01, they had called Connecticut for Obama. So I know my vote didn't make a difference.
Well, exactly. You know, I was criticized, Peter, by a lot of our listeners by saying, you know, you're throwing in the towel. You're going, you're going to guarantee Obama's reelection. And I said, hey, you guys know where I live. I live in Washington State. Come on, yeah. Washington State is about as blue as you can get.
Yeah, if you live in a blue state or a red state, you can vote your conscience. It was all the swing states where it really mattered. But you know, it really bothered me, and I pointed this out on my radio show, which, by the way, I do it every day, every weekday on schiffradio.com if I'm not on in your area. But I thought about all the money that was spent on this election, because it's about $8 billion. But almost all that money from all the races was for television ads. And think about it. Who decides who they're going to vote for based on a television commercial? The morons, the idiots. I mean, even the Democrats, right? If you're intelligent enough to do a little research, you know what you believe in, you research the candidates, you understand their positions, you understand their philosophy, and then you vote. What kind of idiot has to rely on a commercial to decide who's going to vote for? And basically, it occurred to me that that's how we determine our leaders. We leave it up to the idiots. It's whoever the idiots vote for. Whoever wins the idiot vote is the president of the United States. And Obama was able to convince more idiots to vote for him than Romney, so he won.
You know, I got to tell you, one of the things that makes my job so easy is guys like Peter Schiff. You know, I'm glad you've kind of backed away. You're not the wallflower anymore that you used to be, Peter. No, and I appreciate that. Okay, how does all of this affect investing, in your opinion?
Well, you have to understand that the end game is going to be a dollar crisis. I mean, no way around that. A sovereign debt crisis. The bond bubble bursts. The dollar falls through the floor. And so if you're an investor, you can't be left holding dollars. And you can't own any debt denominated in dollars, whether it's a treasury obligation, a muni bond, a corporate bond, CD. You can't even stuff money under your mattress because it's going to lose its value. So you got to buy gold and silver. You got to look abroad. You got to buy a good portfolio, gets foreign stocks, dividend-paying foreign stocks, foreign bonds. That's the types of portfolios that we are developing for our clients at Europe Pacific Capital. We help them manage them. We run mutual funds based around that strategy. But you got to get rid of your dollars, because when the music stops, you know, the more dollars you have, the more you're going to lose.
And the harder it's going to be to sit down in a chair that isn't there when the music stops. Yeah. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about Euro Pacific Capital, Peter.
Well, that's my broker-dealer. It's also a registered investment advisory firm, so you can have a brokerage account through us and have access to most of the major markets around the world, probably all the major markets and most of the not-so-major markets. But we also run mutual funds. I believe I manage 7 mutual funds and separately managed accounts, so we can manage money for you or help you manage it yourself through the broker-dealer. I have a Canadian company as well, Europe Pacific Canada. For those of you who are up north, work with my company in Canada. I also have Europe Pacific Bank for people who are not U.S. citizens. They can deal with me through my offshore bank. And one of the unique things about my offshore bank is, in addition to brokerage and asset management service, we are a bank, and we allow people to have bank accounts and debit cards, but we also allow them to denominate their deposits in gold or silver, by the way. So if you want to have, let's say, $100,000 worth of gold, I'll store it for you. I'll give you a debit card, and you have $100,000 worth of gold in your wallet at all times. You have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week access to that gold. Anywhere a Visa or MasterCard is accepted, you can take it to an ATM, you can buy stuff with it, but your principal is not in paper. Your principal is in real money, in gold or silver, in however you want to do it. And then I've also got a metals company in the city, Europe Pacific Precious Metals, for people who want to buy physical gold, bullion, and have it delivered to them.
You got me stunned. I didn't realize that your operation was that big. I'm particularly intrigued with your, no, I'm serious. I'm particularly intrigued with your gold-denominated cards. Yeah,
I mean, no one else is really doing it. I think years from now, a lot more people will be doing a lot more banks, but it's a great program. It's starting to catch on. The only caveat is you can't be an American citizen and participate. Because I'm not offering the card domestically, you have to have a bank account with my offshore bank, but my offshore bank won't accept an American customer. And that's because of all the rules and regulations that I would have to abide by were I to do that. And I would also subject myself to all kinds of scrutiny by the U.S. government. So I don't want to deal with it. And so like many other financial institutions abroad, no Americans need apply. You got a U.S. passport, we can't help you. But if you live in any other country, anywhere in the world, we are welcome business.
Irish Tony, there's a guy for you to call, my friend over in London. Peter, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. You're a very interesting guy. Appreciate you taking some time, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you've appreciated this particular weekend edition of the Korelin Economics Report.